Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get any updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391, get any updates to the forecast through that means. And you can also email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Taking a look now at the advisories that we have out, all up in the central and eastern portions of the interior. These are winter weather advisories for snow primarily, but with a chance for blowing snow for some of the locations, especially near Tanana, Fairbanks, Fort Yukon. We could have some chances for blowing snow. Some of those are going to be for summit areas where highways are going through the higher elevations, but watch out for snow and blowing snow conditions through around 10 p.m. this evening. For our satellite imagery, we can start off looking at a low pressure system out over the Bering Sea, pushing further to the north, driving cloud cover out over the northern Bering and over portions of the western part of mainland Alaska, bringing some areas of snow to the area. And then we can also see another low coming up from the south of the Alaska Peninsula, bringing up some cloud cover towards the peninsula and some precipitation near to the area as well. Watching this loop again, we can see some lingering cloud cover over the interior portion of the state, helping to bring us some of that snow that's resulting in those winter weather advisories that we have out for the portions of the interior. And then we can look down over the panhandle. We are actually seeing a lack of cloud cover due to high pressure that is over the area, keeping precipitation at bay and keeping nice weather out for the panhandle. Taking a look now at the weather for the remainder of today, we do see that high pressure out over the Panhandle area extending out over south central Alaska as well, keeping both of these locations out of the precipitation for today. We do have a couple waves coming up towards the Alaska Peninsula further to the south, bringing in some warmer air, but as we get into the Alaska Peninsula, it's still cold enough to see snow right now. Moving up more into the mainland part of the state, stuck between two high pressure systems, we have the area of snow in there from the west coast around the Seward Peninsula area out through the interior, stretching out to the upper Yukon Valley as well. Primarily seeing snow, however, there is a chance for some of the more southern locations to see a mix of rain and snow between these two high pressure systems. That high pressure along the Arctic coastline keeping precipitation down into the Brooks Range and keeping nicer conditions up along the Arctic coast. Down over the Bering Sea, we do have a double barrel low out there that is pushing one of those lows up into the northern part of the Bering, bringing snow to St. Lawrence Island and snow throughout much of the central and western portions of the Bering, and then precipitation down in the Aleutians as well. Cold enough out west to see snow for the western Aleutians, getting warmer as we approach the central Aleutians where we're seeing some more rain. As we move into tonight, things are going to cool down out over the Aleutians, expecting temperatures to drop enough to bring snow to the central and eastern Aleutian Islands. However, as we move further to the east, that southerly wind coming off of the North Pacific going to bring in some rain to the Alaska Peninsula. However, as we get by the Bristol Bay area, cold enough there for snow, expecting some snow on the coastlines and western capes. As we move up the west coast of the state around the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound areas, expecting to see snow that will extend into the interior parts of the state, all the way out to the eastern interior and up into the eastern portions of the Brooks Range as well. High pressure continuing to dominate southeast Alaska and is still going to be extending in over south central Alaska for tonight, keeping both of these areas primarily out of the precipitation and cloud cover. Down into Saturday, that high pressure is continuing to dominate the Panhandle area. However, we do have a system approaching the southern Gulf that is starting to drive into that, starting to flatten out the region a little bit, bringing in some of the precipitation to Kodiak Island on Saturday. Going to be primarily rain, as it's going to be warm enough off those warmer Pacific waters to bring rain to the island. As we move out over the southwestern portion of the state, a mix of rain and snow is expected. Higher elevations will still see primarily snow, but some of those lower elevations will be mixing with rain. That's going to continue up into the YK Delta area, but as we get closer towards the Norton Sound, expecting that to turn back to snow, some of the colder temperatures up north. For the St. Lawrence Island area through the Seward Peninsula and Kotzebue Sound, we are expecting to see some snow with that southerly push, and then we are going to see some snow up along the northwestern portions of the Arctic coastline. The rest of mainland Alaska should be pretty clear as far as precipitation that will extend down into south central as well. So move out over the Bering Sea, we are going to see primarily snow showers, but dropping down into the central Aleutian Islands, warm enough there to see a mix of rain and snow. And then we can notice south of the western Aleutians, we have another system coming up from the south. As we move into Sunday, that system will push ever closer to the central Aleutians, starting to bring some rain to the area throughout the day on Sunday, with more rain coming in the afternoon. Let's look out over the eastern or western Aleutians, cold enough there to see some snow showers through the day Sunday. As we push further to the east, we are going to see some high pressure building in over the eastern Aleutian Islands. Still some lighter showers underneath, where we are expecting to see some rain for the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. And our low that's moving in over the west coast of the state, bringing rainfall to areas all around the Bristol Bay area, YK Delta, starting to become more snow as we get up towards the Norton Sound area into the Kotzebue Sound. And some lighter showers of rain and snow mix in portions of the western interior and in the lower Yukon Valley. As we move out over south central Alaska, finally precipitation moving back into the area with a trough moving in from the south, bringing a rain-snow line up along the North Gulf Coast, with snow in the higher elevations and areas further inland. The heaviest precipitation from this southerly flow is going to be on the Gulf side. And for the Panhandle area, still going to see the effects of high pressure keeping the precipitation further to the west for Sunday. So you look for our temperatures for Saturday morning. Starting off in the Panhandle area, temperature is going to drop down into the mid to lower 20s, a little bit warmer there at Sitka, only dropping down to around 30 degrees. For south central Alaska, temperatures dropping into the 20s in most locations, a little bit colder in interior locations, especially in the Copper River Basin, where we expect Glen Ellen to drop down to 5 degrees. In the 20s for the most part for the interior, down by Northway a little bit colder, down to 11 degrees. As we move up through the Brooks Range, we're going to drop below zero, dropping into the minus teens as we get along the Arctic coastline. As we get back to the Kotzebue Sound area, dropping down into the mid-teens, and in the mid-20s for the Norton Sound area through the YK Delta, and then around 30 degrees for the Bristol Bay area, with Dillingham and King Salmon both dropping down to 30 degrees for lows Saturday morning. Through the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutian Islands, expecting those to drop into the mid-30s, and expecting 30-degree low for St. Paul Saturday morning. As we move into Saturday afternoon high temperatures, St. Paul is going to get up to 35 degrees, and in the Aleutians getting up into right around 40 degrees. Bristol Bay area getting up into the lower 40s, with Iliamna getting to 38 degrees. In the YK Delta area getting into the mid-30s, a little bit colder as we get further to the north, right around 30 degrees for the Seward Peninsula, with Nome, Kotzebue, and Shishmaref all getting up to 30 degrees. Along the Arctic coastline, getting up into the mid-20s to upper 20s. In through the Brooks Range, we're going to be in the lower 20s with through the pass and for Arctic Village, both getting up to 22 degrees. And then into the mid to upper 30s for the interior. Fairbanks getting a little bit warmer, 43 degrees expected high. Down in south central Alaska, expecting temperatures to get into the lower 40s for the most part. Anchorage staying a little bit colder, only getting up to 39 degrees. And then down in the Panhandle area, expecting temperatures to get to the mid to upper 40s. As we go into Sunday morning, those lows going to drop down into the 20s for much of the Panhandle. Ketchikan and Sitka staying a little bit warmer, staying in the 30s. And then for south central Alaska, we are going to drop back down into the 20s for many interior locations, right around 30 for areas near the water, with Anchorage, Kenai, and Homer all dropping down to 31 degrees. Kodiak dropping down to 38 degrees. In the interior portion of the state, coldest out east in the mid to lower 20s for most locations there, and then into the upper 20s for those western locations. Galena dropping down to 29 degrees. Colder as we get further to the north, as we get over to the Arctic coastline, we are going to see temperatures drop into the teens, or western locations staying in the lower 20s, and that's going to be true for the Kotzebue Sound area as well. Kotzebue dropping down to 22 degrees. In the Norton Sound area, into the mid to upper 20s for those lows, 26 for Nome and 27 for Gamble. Down in the YK Delta area, right around 30 degrees, and then in the mid-30s for the Bristol Bay area, with 34 degrees expected low for Dillingham, King Salmon, and Iliamna. Down into the mid-30s for the Alaska Peninsula, and mid-30s through the Aleutian Islands, with 30 degrees expected low for St. Paul. Sunday afternoon highs getting up to 37 degrees for St. Paul, right around 40 degrees for the Aleutians, and the lower 40s for the Alaska Peninsula and into the Bristol Bay area. In the 30s for the YK Delta, and lower 30s to right around 30 degrees for the Seward Peninsula area. Down into the mid-20s for the Arctic coastline, and right around 40 degrees for the interior and south central Alaska, and right around 50 for the southeastern portion of the state.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather for Saturday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread IFR conditions are expected, with much of those IFR conditions making it into the Alaska Peninsula and all along the west coast of the state. Some areas of IFR are also going to be expected for the YK Delta area and down in the Bristol Bay area. As we push into the interior portions of the state, MVFR conditions expected for interior Alaska, with some IFR making it to western portions of the interior. VFR up along the Arctic coastline, and primarily VFR down in south central, with some areas of MVFR included. And then VFR conditions under high pressure expected for the Panhandle. Saturday afternoon conditions are going to remain VFR for the Panhandle. VFR conditions expected for south central Alaska as well, and then up by the Brooks Range and in the northern portions of the interior, expecting some MVFR conditions. Then MVFR conditions along the coastline, all along the west coast of the state, and still going to see a lot of IFR conditions out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Moving into Sunday morning, primarily IFR conditions remaining for the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Some areas of MVFR still along the southwest coastline, and IFR conditions expected for the Seward Peninsula and up along the northwest coast, with some IFR conditions for areas around the Brooks Range that will stretch throughout the Brooks Range, with some MVFR into the interior portions of the state. Primarily VFR conditions expected for south central Alaska Sunday morning, with some areas of MVFR and IFR coming into the Kodiak Island and Kenai Peninsula areas. VFR conditions remaining for Panhandle area Sunday morning. Then Sunday afternoon, VFR conditions once again remain over the Panhandle area. However, there are more MVFR and IFR conditions in the Gulf of Alaska that are expanding throughout the area. VFR still primarily for south central areas, but down in the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, still going to see some more MVFR with some IFR mixed in as well. Interior portions of the state, primarily VFR, some isolated areas of IFR. That's going to be true on the North Slope as well. Down the west coast of the state, MVFR conditions through the Norton Sound area, then starting to get more IFR as we get down into southwest Alaska. For the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, primarily IFR conditions will remain through Sunday afternoon. For the passes, starting up north at AKwx Pass, MVFR conditions are expected on Saturday, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill should both be VFR throughout the day. Rainy Pass will start off marginal and then improve to VFR conditions. Windy Pass should be VFR throughout the day Saturday. Isabel Pass starting off marginal, improving to VFR in the afternoon. Mentasta expected to be VFR throughout the day. Tenita should also be VFR, as well as Portage. And Chilkoot and White both expected to be VFR for the day on Saturday. For our freezing level, surface freezing line riding through the Panhandle area and through the North Gulf coastline, out through the Bristol Bay area and up into the northern portions of the Bering Sea. A lot of warmer air coming up towards the Gulf of Alaska, with freezing levels as high as 8,000 feet just south of the Gulf of Alaska. For our icing, starting off way out west, we have some areas below 8,000 feet expected near the western Aleutians, and then below 10,000 feet for much of the central and eastern portion of the Bering and Aleutian Islands. That will extend out into southwest Alaska, including the Alaska Peninsula, and then up much of the west coast. On the northwest portions, we're expecting that to be below 8,000, and much more clearing for eastern portions of mainland Alaska and down in the Panhandle. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is going to be south of the western Aleutian Islands at 120 knots, but around 75 to 80 knots out of the west, out actually over the islands. Southerly winds around 60 knots to the central Bering, and then out over northern portions of the state out of the west, 60 to 80 knots is expected, diminishing as we get further to the south, around 50 knots over the southern portions of the mainland, and then around 90 knots out of a northwesterly direction over the Panhandle. Down to 9,000 feet, strongest winds are still going to be over much of the northern portion of the state. We will have somewhat westerly winds, 40 to 45 knots. Southerly winds along the west coast, 35 to 40 knots. Winds out over the Panhandle, primarily northwesterly winds, around 25 knots. And then out over western portions of our area, westerly winds, 30 knots for the Aleutians. For 3,000 feet, weaker winds out over the Aleutians, stronger out over the central part of the interior, central part of the Bering, out of the south at about 50 knots, dropping down to 20 to 35 knots as we get over the west coast of the state. 60 knots out of a southeasterly direction near the Alaska Peninsula. As we move over mainland Alaska, southern portions, lighter winds, but as we get up into the interior, 30 to 40 knots out of a southwesterly direction, and then diminishing again as we get along the Arctic coastline. Down for the Panhandle area, light winds out of the north, getting up to as high as around 20 knots. For our turbulence out over southwest Alaska, below 4,000 feet is expected, with some moderate turbulence near Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula. Some areas of light turbulence below 3,000 feet for the Seward Peninsula.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. It was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data. So we're going to put that over here, no satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out, back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey, is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
For the marine section, we'll start off with a quick look at our ice edge. We do have some southeasterly winds coming in through Saturday. They're going to bring or push the ice edge back further to the north and to the west. And then on Sunday, winds are going to start to weaken, so we won't see much movement. But as we move into next week, we are going to expect some southerly winds and warmer air to come up, start to push back ice to the north, and will also help to melt some of the ice that is in the Bristol Bay area early next week. On Saturday, for the southeastern portion of the state, inside waters, we're going to have northerly winds 10 to 15 knots, and out over the Gulf, easterly winds 15 knots, with seas as high as 6 feet. For Sunday, we are going to have in the inside waters weaker winds 5 to 10 knots, and then southeasterly winds out over the Gulf 10 to 20 knots, weakest to the south, getting up to as high as 25 to 30 knots out of the east as we get up into northern portions of the Gulf. So look out for Saturday for south central Alaska. Out over the Gulf, we have winds 20 to 30 knots out of the east, expecting the strongest winds as we get closer towards the Barren Islands, and easterly winds 30 knots on the west of the Barrens as well. In Cook Inlet, northeasterly winds 15 to 20 knots, strongest to the south, and in Prince William Sound, northerly winds around 10 knots. As we look into Sunday, we are going to expect winds and seas to pick up a little bit, especially around the Barren Islands area, where we'll have gale force winds of 35 knots out of the east and seas as high as 11 feet, and 25 to 30 knots out of an easterly direction for the remainder of the Gulf. Prince William Sound, northeasterly winds 15 knots. In Cook Inlet area, 15 knots up north, and then getting up to as high as 25 to 30 knots out of a north to east direction as we get closer towards Kamishak Bay. Saturday for Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, easterly winds around the peninsula and Kodiak Island at around 30 knots, 25 knots as we get further off to the west, seas as high as 11 feet, higher on the Pacific side. As we look into Sunday, we are going to have southwesterly winds 15 to 20 knots around the peninsula, and as we get closer towards Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, starting to switch to become more southeasterly, 15 to 25 knots, strongest by the Bristol Bay area, and then northeasterly winds through Shelikof Strait around 25 knots. For Saturday for the Aleutian Islands, weaker winds all around 10 to 15 knots, primarily out of an easterly or northeasterly direction, seas as high as 8 to 9 feet on the Pacific side. Then on Sunday, flow out over the eastern Aleutians out of a southerly direction, 10 to 20 knots, getting stronger as we move further to the west and switching to become more easterly, 25 to 30 knots as we push off further to the west. Along the west coast of the state, starting up north, we do have southerly winds, 15 to 20 knots. As we move to the southern side of Nunavik Island, switching to become more easterly, 15 to 25 knots, strongest by Nunavik Island, and then by the Pribilof Islands, northerly winds around 10 knots, seas as high as 9 feet by St. Matthew Island. On Sunday, flow along the west coast, southeasterly winds 20 to 25 knots, and as we push out more towards St. Matthew Island and the Pribilof Islands, northeasterly winds around 10 knots. For the Arctic coastline, we'll start off on the west coast. Southerly winds 20 to 25 knots, becoming southeasterly 20 knots as we get more on the Arctic coastline. And then on Sunday, becoming southwesterly along the Arctic coastline around 15 knots. And then southerly winds along the west coast 15 to 20 knots, highest by the Bering Strait. Recap for our weather for tonight. Starting off over the Bering Sea, we have 2 low pressure systems, one out over the southern Bering, one out over the northern, bringing snow showers to the areas, including the eastern and central Aleutian Islands. Warmer wind coming in from the Pacific, bringing in some rain to the Alaska Peninsula. Still cold enough on the Bering side to have snow out over the Bristol Bay area. Southern portions of mainland Alaska and for the Panhandle dominated by high pressure, keeping precipitation further to the north where we have snow showers throughout the interior out by the Seward Peninsula as well. We do have winter weather advisories for snow and blowing snow in the central and eastern portions of the interior that will last until 10 p.m. tonight. And up along the Arctic coastline, we're seeing some clear skies and more fair weather with snow being stuck in the Brooks Range. As we move into Saturday, we are going to continue to have high pressure out over southeast Alaska and south central, but some precipitation moving closer towards Kodiak Island, bringing up some warm air and rain to the island. Some rain for the Alaska Peninsula as well. A mix of rain and snow expected for the southwestern portions of the mainland, where we will see snow at higher elevations, and then that mix of rain and snow as you get to low-lying areas. Up along the west coast of the state, some lighter snow around St. Lawrence Island, the Seward Peninsula, and up by the Kotzebue Sound area. Out over the Bering Sea, snow showers are expected and a little bit warmer for the central Aleutians. We are expecting a rain and snow mix there with rain for the eastern Aleutian Islands. And finally on Sunday, the west coast is going to get hit with some heavier precipitation, rain by the Bristol Bay area, becoming more snow by the Seward Peninsula, and rain-snow mix for the southern portions of south central Alaska.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal, pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.